Yo guys, Jonathan here, and this is why the 2016 MacBook Pro should remove Pro from its name. Now specifically, I'm talking about the 13-inch baseline MacBook Pro, and before I jump in, regardless of what I think it should be called, there are some pro things about this laptop. For starters, performance is better than you might think, which might be confusing because one of the biggest complaints I've seen about these MacBook Pros is that they're overpriced and underpowered. The perception of value and the idea of more for less only really means something if that more yields something tangible. Take this 13-inch MacBook Pro for example, which runs $1499. Inside you're getting a 2 GHz i5 CPU, 8 gigs of RAM, Intel Iris Graphics 540, and a 256 GB SSD. Now for comparison's sake, the HP Spectre X360 runs $1299, and inside that you're getting a 2.7 GHz i7 CPU, 16 GB of RAM, Intel HD Graphics 620, and a 512 GB SSD. So on paper, that i7, which is Kaby Lake mind you compared to Skylake on the MacBook Pro, is clocked much higher and should destroy the i5 in every possible way, but ultimately, it comes down to how that hardware works with the software. I've talked about it a million times before, but the reason I use Final Cut Pro X is because of how optimized it is. So what I did was take some 1080p footage from the Canon 80D, dropped it into Premiere on the Spectre. The timeline ended up being 5 minutes and 51 seconds, and from there, I did a high bitrate single pass H.264 export. Now next, if this doesn't show you what I'm talking about, I'm not sure what else would. I did the exact same thing within Final Cut Pro X, but the plot twist was I booted up the MacBook Pro, launched Final Cut Pro X, imported the footage into Final Cut, dropped the footage into the timeline, and that same H.264 single pass high bitrate export took 1 minute 23 seconds on the MacBook Pro, which is crazy. So think about that and process that for a minute. A near 6-minute video is exported in about 1/4 of real time. Now for those of you saying, well, it's just 1080p footage, it's not a big deal. Well, that same exact footage took nearly 9 minutes on the Spectre and Adobe Premiere. At this point in the video, this is where you come in and say, well, why don't you compare apples to apples? Why don't you compare Premiere versus Premiere? And that is not the point. With the MacBook Pro, you're not necessarily just paying for hardware, you're paying for the software experience that comes with it. So for all of you out there who edit and create video, it would be a disservice if I didn't show you an option that worked really well. If you could get the end result but do it in a fraction of the time, why would I not show you that? On the flip side, this doesn't mean I don't like the HP Spectre. I think it is a fantastic laptop. It's just an example of why specs don't always mean everything. Another thing that you would never notice just by looking at this MacBook Pro is how fast the SSD is. In terms of fancy tech talk, the MacBook Pro writes around 1300 megabytes per second. It broke Blackmagic's speed test at 2000 megabytes per second, and actually it should be closer to 3000. Using the HP Spectre again as an example, that writes around 600 megabytes per second and reads around 1600. Now what the heck do all those numbers mean? For a real world example, what I did was take a 26 gigabyte file, duplicate that on the HP Spectre, and that finished in about 1 minute and 24 seconds. Now duplicating that exact same 26 gigabyte folder on the MacBook Pro, that took 34 seconds. Now as far as what else is good on the MacBook Pro, the speakers sound fantastic, and for reference, here's a comparison against last year's baseline 13-inch MacBook Pro and also the HP Spectre.
You're the love of my sugar, you're the love of my life. Sweet, 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 sweet love of mine. You're the love of my sugar, you're the love of my life. Oh, you are sweeter with time with you. One and only, you're the love of my sugar, you're the love of my life. Oh, you are.
So these were all max volume, and levels wise, they were all pretty equal, but the clarity and the overall definition on the new MacBook Pro was night and day better. On top of that, the display on this MacBook Pro is really freaking good. If you've ever used a MacBook Pro, whether 13 or 15 inch, the extra brightness is super noticeable. And beyond just the brightness, the color on this display is equally as impressive. So with that, there are definitely some really good things with this laptop, but there's also some negative. The biggest drawback for me right now is the lack of an SD card slot, simply because it's something that I use so often. I understand that Apple is showing us where things probably will be down the road, but right now I still use an SD card quite a bit. The lack of MagSafe definitely breaks my heart as well, but the Thunderbolt 3 ports, which come in a USB-C form factor, are actually kind of cool. With these, you can do a ton of different things, including charge on either port. What's kind of rad with that is you're not just limited to Apple's charger, you can actually charge these MacBook Pros with an external battery bank. From there, you're able to output both video and data simultaneously, which is really cool in a dock type setup. And lastly, with Thunderbolt 3, you're also unlocking USB 3.1. So for example, I edit quite a bit off an external SanDisk SSD. With the older MacBook Pros, that capped out at at USB 3.0, so the read speeds were around 400 or 500 megabytes per second. And on the new MacBook Pro with a single USB-C to USB-C cable, that unlocked the full potential and the read speeds were around 800 megabytes per second. Now through all the good and the bad, the absolute biggest problem I have with this MacBook Pro is the name. It is confusing as hell. Right now, if you walked into an Apple store looking for a 13-inch MacBook Pro, this is the question you're gonna get. Are you looking for a 13-inch MacBook Pro with 2 Thunderbolt ports and no Touch Bar? Or a 13-inch MacBook Pro with 4 Thunderbolt ports and a Touch Bar? Are you kidding me? For most of you out there who are familiar with technology, I'm sure it's not a big deal, but the second mom walks in there, she's not gonna know what to do. So with that, it would have been way simpler if this 13-inch MacBook Pro was simply the 13-inch MacBook. With that, it would be the perfect lineup. The 12-inch MacBook is 1 port, the 13-inch MacBook is 2 ports, and if you want 4 ports, go to the 13 or 15-inch MacBook Pro. At the end of the day, a Pro label on something shouldn't dictate how you use a laptop or what you do with it, and more than anything, I think it's a slap in the face towards the 12-inch MacBook. That is a surprisingly capable machine, and I don't think if this was called the 13-inch MacBook, it would make it any less valuable. Take the Pro name off of it, drop the price slightly, have it live alongside the 12-inch MacBook, and call it a day. Now, for anyone out there who agrees with me and potentially wants a new MacBook Pro, I teamed up with Dan and Lincoln over at What's Inside. Not only are we giving away a brand new 13-inch MacBook Pro, but also 2 Apple Watches as well. Now to enter, all you gotta do is make sure you're subscribed here on this channel, so go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet, and then from there, head over to the What's Inside channel, check his video right here, where he actually dropped a MacBook Pro out of a helicopter, which is kinda nuts. Don't worry, that is not the MacBook Pro you're winning, you're getting a brand new one, so if you're down to win one, make sure to smash that like button. This is Jonathan, and I will catch you guys later.